Alright, so starting off where we left off in the last video. In the last video, we skinned our hand, our set of joints. So we built the skeleton, and then we attached that skeleton, or bound the skin to the skeleton, so that all of our joints work in conjunction with our mechanical style of modeling a hand. From here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up a driven key that will control the movement of one finger, because clearly the steps can be repeated over and over again to make the entire hand. But we're going to attach a key, a driver, to this wrist node that will curl the finger in its entirety. That way we don't have to come in, select each individual joint, and then rotate it individually when we're trying to animate this guy. Alright, so how do we do this? If you notice up at your top left, currently we are in modeling. For this, we're going to want to come down to our animation. This opens up a brand new category up here of key. We're going to be using set driven keys. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to deselect everything in my scene. So I'm just going to click out here in the world. Up here, set driven key, we have set driven key set. We're going to click on set. That's going to open up our set driven key dialog window. Alright, if we're to load in drivers, so we have two categories, a driver and a driven. The driver clearly is the object or the group of objects that are going to control the driven. Alright, generally you have one driver and you can have one or multiple driven. In our case, that's going to be the key. So with this, we're also going to need something to drive our driven. So we're going to create a brand new attribute for the wrist. So we're going to come down here, I'm going to expand extra attributes ahead of time. With the wrist joint selected, I'm going to come over here into my attribute editor, go to attributes, and then add attribute. That's going to pull up this window right here, our add attribute window. Notice it shows what we're adding an attribute to, so it's add attribute wrist 1. Long name, I'm going to call this index finger curl. I'll leave it on float and then give it two values. 0 for minimum and 1 for maximum. I'm going to hit add. And then if we notice over here on the right hand side in our attribute editor, under extra attributes, we now have index finger curl. We can exit out of this window. So this is going to give us a driver. It's giving us essentially just this slider that we can animate and key. So with our wrist selected, I'm going to load the driver. Now, if you notice here, we have index finger curl as a keyable driver. From here, we're going to go ahead and select each of these individual bones. I'm going to load them all at the same time. So I'm going to come over to my outliner and just expand out the hierarchy of joints in my finger, or I'm sorry, in my skeleton for the index finger. I'm going to select and hold down Command and select index, index 1, and index 2. I'm going to leave out the index tip because, as we discussed earlier in the last video, the index tip is only there in order to create a bone from this index 2 out, right? So with these three selected, I'm going to come down here and hit load driven. That's going to give us our 3 driven. If we highlight those, we can now see the available channels that exist within all 3 of these, right? Now if you remember, in reality our index 1 joint, our index joint, has an additional rotate Y, but we're not going to deal with that. We've frozen it rotate Y in the other 2 because the finger just doesn't bend that way in nature. So I'm going to highlight all 3 of these and select rotate Z. That's going to be the driven channel for each of these. And up here I'm going to choose my driver channel, which is going to be my index finger curl, which is the extra attribute that we had discussed earlier. So now what we have to do is key a 0 state, which is essentially the inactive state of each of these. So I'm going to come down, I'm going to select my wrist node. Notice over here on the right hand side, my attribute editor, my index finger curl is at 0. I'm going to key the 0 state for the driver first. You always start with the driver and then go to the driven. Alright, so with this selected, I'm going to come down and key the 0 state. Alright, notice it popped up right here with a blue outline around this box. Now I'm going to come down and grab these 3, rotate Z, and I'm going to key the driven. Now on the 0 state, if everything is zeroed out, you can do this pretty easily by highlighting all 3 of those joints inside of your driven channel and then selecting the driven channel in the right hand side, which is the rotate Z, and keying all 3 at one time. From here we need to come back into the wrist. We can either select here or select the actual object in our scene. I'm going to come to my index finger curl attribute and move it all the way to the right hand side so it's got a full 1 value. I'm going to key this, and then I'm going to come down into each one of these joints individually and make my rotation. And key it. Come into index 2, make my rotation, key, and then at the final index. There we go, and key one more time. Now, if I come back out into my wrist, when I bring this down to 0, my finger curls nice and naturally from 0 to 1. But if we're editing this or we're animating this hand, we're not going to want to go in and out and in and out of this wrist node in order to grab this index finger curl attribute or slider. Now we can edit this from our channel box as well, because we add the extra attribute, which then now adds it to our channel box. So we can turn this off and on like so. But there's an easier way to go about this, and this is to set up a small user interface in order to interact with this finger curl. Come back to my attribute editor. So to make this, I'm going to come out into my front view, pull this guy down just a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that my user interface doesn't render. So I'm going to start off with a small NURB square, grab this, pull it up in my world, and over just a bit. This looks good. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm going to scale this guy. Something along these lines right here. Looks pretty good. Actually, they're just a wee bit bigger. There we go. That'll work. Alright. Snap to the grid. There we go. From here, I'm going to come into my NURB square, my limit information. I'm going to make sure that this is limited in all areas so it doesn't move at all. We can do that either through here or we can actually just lock this square. Honestly, that's probably what I'm going to do. It'll be faster. So I'm going to come out here, I'm going to grab all these. I'm going to modify, freeze transformations, right click, lock selected. Alright, that way I can't accidentally come in here and start moving this guy around, right? If I've got this selected, it's good and locked in. Now, one thing I'm going to want to do as well is grab all these small sections of the square and lock those as well. That way the individual pieces don't move either. So I grab that, I can't go anywhere. Now from here, this is just a container essentially for my manipulator or my button that I'm going to make. It's more of a slider really. So I'm going to create a NURBS circle. I'm going to pull this up, move them over. I'm going to snap it to the grid. Right here looks good. Actually, I'll pull it down to this one. I'll rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm going to scale this down until it fits right inside here. Like so. Alright. Then I'm going to freeze the transformations on that. This is going to be the new 0 point, and up here is going to be the new activated point for our slider. So what we're going to need to do is make a set driven key for the movement of this slider that correlates to finger curl 1, or the index finger curl as we named it in this video. So while finger curl or index finger curl was the driver for the finger, it is now going to be the driven for this user interface element. Alright. First thing I want to do though is make sure that this doesn't move up and down, left to right, past where I want it to go. So I'm going to set up my locking for this in everything except for my translate Y. So I'm going to hold down Command and deselect translate Y. Alright, so again, highlight everything, Command, deselect, and I'm on a Mac, so maybe Control or one of your other selection keys if you're on a PC. So deselect, right click, and lock selected. Notice over here you have that gray box except for next to translate Y. So translate Y is not selected. But we still need to limit its movement capabilities. So we're going to come down in here to translates. Notice this is locked in the X and the Z. we need to set up the location, current location, as its minimum. So I'm going to set this up. I hit my left button here, which locks this as its new lowest area. Now I'm going to come over here, grab this guy, translate this up. I'm holding down X. I'm just going to snap them. Notice I can't move them left and right. I'm going to snap them up to here, its highest level. Turn this on. Oh, let me do that again. This is going to be a 6. Alright. And I've hit enter. Now, as I move up, this is as high as it'll go. I can try and push it further down, but it's not going to move. Alright? I can try and move it anywhere else, but it's stuck inside of its own little slider, which is good. Alright, so we set 0. It's 0 because we froze our transformations, and 6 as its highest point. From here, we're ready to rock and roll and set up our driven keys. So I'm going to come back out here to my perspective view, just because I like to work in perspective view a little better. From here, I'm going to deselect everything. Whenever I'm setting up new keys, I find deselecting things first sets you up for success. Alright, I come back into, remember we're in animation, come into key, set driven key, set. This opens up my dialog box. Now, I'm going to set my driver first. This is going to be my driver, my new button. I can name that, right now it's named Nerd Circles. I'm probably going to name this Index Curl UI. Alright, that'll work. So we've got that. I'm going to load my driver. Notice the only available channel is my Translate Y. Go ahead and select that. It's because everything else is locked. Now I'm going to come down and select my wrist. And I'm going to hit Load Driven. Notice now we have index finger curl in the driven channel. So I'm going to select that one. Now remember, we always start, when we start the key, with the driver. So I'm going to come back up. I'm going to select this in world space. I'm actually going to grab this and push it down. Make sure it's all the way down. Or you can come over to your channel box and just make sure your translate is at 0. I'm going to hit key, because right now we're loading or keying our 0 keys. So I'm going to key it at 0. Then I'm going to come in and select my wrist and my index finger curl. It's currently at 0 as well. We can see that right here in our channel box, or if we went to our attribute editor, we can see right here that it's being controlled. Also, the fact that it's blue means that it's set up in a driven key. So I'm going to key that 0 point. We're going to come back over. We're going to grab our controller and we're going to move it all the way up. There we go. It's now at the top. I know that because Translate 6, which is the highest point. I'm going to key that. And I'm going to come back into my wrist and grab it here, index finger curl, and move this over to a full curl to 1, and key. Now, if we've done everything properly, we can move this and get, that was snap set, I think. Something funky is going on. Yeah, we're snapping the grid currently. Here we go. I can move this up and down inside my field without any issues. So my button is now controlling, or my user interface is now controlling the index finger curl driver that we set up earlier. So setting up this network is a really handy way of building an animation network for yourself over here on the side that you'll then use later on to animate your character.